Hi, Church. Pastor Jeff here with another Trinity check-in. I have a question today, a question for me, which will turn into a question for you, and it comes from my morning prayer. So this is the prayer book I've been using lately. I've talked about this before. It's become an important part of my own spiritual life to say these prayers at certain times during the day. And one thing you do in morning and in evening is called a litany, a list of things that you pray for, and there's a cycle that it goes through, and I've prayed this one before. But for some reason, this particular prayer hit me this morning, and I've learned to wonder when something hits me like that if maybe God is trying to tell me something. Let me read this prayer to you. Oh God, let your pastors declare the unsearchable riches of Christ and pierce each person's heart with the mystery of your love. Let your pastors declare the unsearchable riches of Christ. I prayed that and thought, maybe I ought to do that. Now, okay, of course, to be honest, there are lots of ways that I hope I declare the unsearchable riches of Christ. I hope that every one of our sermons here at Trinity, every time I open my mouth, I hope there's at least a trace of the unsearchable riches of Christ. But it made me think as I thought about it, well, what are the unsearchable riches of Christ? And how do they pierce each person's heart with the mystery of God's love? And as I thought about that, if somebody came up and asked me, what does that mean? What are the unsearchable riches of Christ? I'm not sure how I'd answer. I know it in the core of my being. Maybe that's the mystery part. But at the same time, the riches of Christ are so broad that it's difficult to bring it down into a single sentence. One of the first things I thought of, though, was something that I have our staff do when we have our staff meetings. And I swear every single time, every one of them forgets the question is coming, even though the question comes every single meeting. And it's this: where have you seen God since we last met? Every time they forget, every time they panic and have to think of what their God moment is. And every time it ends up being heartwarming and helps us to see how God is working in our church and in each of our lives. And we had a staff meeting yesterday, and boy, I swear, I think there were more truly deeply touching answers than usual around that table of how God has been moving and working. No, I'm not going to share other people's answers. That might be for another time. But you want to know where the riches of Christ are? Well, it's those stories like that, those God moment stories of where God is working. And so if somebody were to come up to me and ask me, what are the unsearchable riches of Christ? At least today, if they asked me, this is what I think I would answer. It's an awareness of God's work in the world. It's all of those God moments combined and brought together. There's something about seeing God's kingdom at work in the world, to see it spreading. It's the nature of God's work that it hides from our eyes most of the time, or perhaps better said, it waits for us to go looking before God's kingdom reveals itself to us. But it's when we start to see it, it's when we get to the point where we see God working in all around and the things surrounding us. That is a richness. That is an unsearchable richness of Christ. You start to see the connectedness of all things. You start to see God's presence in all things, God's love in all things and in all people especially. You start to be filled with respect and love for God and for people, even those you've never met, even those who are very different, even those who might rub you the wrong way. And you can't see God working in the world and all of this connectedness and all of this love without realizing that you're a part of it too. You start to see your own value, your own purpose, and your own place in what God is doing in the world, your own part in God's great project all around us, with which we are surrounded. That is what it means to me, at least today, to talk about the unsearchable riches of Christ. They're riches not of gold, they're riches of meaning. And that's way better than any gold. You need some gold to buy food and whatnot. You know what I mean. But the meaning means so much more and is so much more rich. And when you learn to see it everywhere and in all things, that's the unsearchable riches of Christ. So here it again. Let your pastors declare the unsearchable riches of Christ and pierce each person's heart with the mystery of your love. Now, you can already see the mystery in there. Not mystery in terms of a whodunit, but a mystery in terms of something that we can't quite know, something that we can't quite see, that we know is there even though we can't quite describe it. And I think that really comes into play with the hope that we get from seeing God working all around us. You know, if God is doing so much in our midst and in our world, in our lives, which in our more blessed moments we are able to see, if God's there, then it means there are good things in store. Yes, that doesn't mean there aren't going to be missteps along the way, that people aren't going to mess it up, that we as a society aren't going to mess it up sometimes, and that doesn't mean that there aren't going to be hardships that, boy, we wish could be avoided. But what it does mean is that even though we don't know the future, we know God is there. We know God is part of it. We know that God is the one shaping the ultimate future. You know, that's the phrase we used at Easter that comes from Frederick Buechner. The worst thing is never the last thing. That's the reminder of Easter right there. That amidst all of it, God is there and God is moving us towards good. Now, I hope that pierces your heart with the mystery of Christ, because I know it does mine, and I find myself getting a little emotional just talking about these stories today. So, that was the question for me. Now here's the question for you. Where have you seen God? Where have you seen God moving in your life lately? Where have you seen God at church? Where have you seen God amongst your coworkers? Where have you seen God anywhere? Start there. And as you do, I promise you, you will learn to see the unsearchable riches of Christ, and you will have your heart pierced with the mystery of God's love. All right. See you soon, church.